Good evening, everybody. I just want to give a 5-minute warning. We're going to start in about 5 minutes, so start finding your way towards a seat. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we're about to get started, so I would ask you all to please find a seat. We're going to have about an hour of open house time for all of these conversations to continue. We have to formally start the meeting first.
Good evening. Hello. Good evening. Thank you so much for coming out on a misty Monday evening. My name is Carol Kowalski. I'm the Assistant Town Manager for Development and the Acting Planning Director. I'd like to thank you all. I'd like to thank elected officials Joe Pato and Michelle Sicolo, who are here, and many of you are town meeting members. I thank you very much for coming tonight. I just have a few short remarks. This is the first major event to gather public input in preparation for the Lexington Comprehensive Plan update. The last plan was done over a decade ago. This is not the last opportunity. It is not the only opportunity, but it is one of many opportunities Lexington residents will have to provide input, opinion, vision, and guidance to the Comprehensive Plan Advisory Committee over the next 2 years or so as the Comprehensive Plan process unfolds. It is also not the only method of public input that we'll use. Tonight, we'll hear about how you experience Lexington today. Over the summer, as many residents will travel and come and go here in town, there will be online opportunities to engage, followed by an early fall second public event for seeking residents' vision for the future of Lexington. Additional opportunities will then follow. I'd like to introduce you to the two co-chairs of the Comprehensive Plan Advisory Committee, Sarah Felton. Sarah is here on your right. Thank you, Sarah. And Ray Yuan here on your left. And I'd like to introduce the chair of the planning board, Jenna Johnson. Jenna will introduce the planning board and call the planning board meeting to order.
Good evening. I'm Jenna Johnson, chair of the planning board, and I cannot thank you enough for braving the wintry weather in June and being here at our kickoff for the comprehensive plan. It's something we've all been looking forward to for many, many months. And on behalf of my colleagues, the planning board, we thank you. And we hope that, as Carol mentioned, that this will be the first of a period of engagement, because to make this Lexington's comprehensive plan, we have to hear from all of you and all of your neighbors and your constituents and everyone. So I officially call to order this meeting of the planning board at 7:16 in Batten Hall Carey Memorial Library. And with me tonight is Vice Chair Bob Creech, Member Charles Hornig, Member Richard Canale, Member Nancy Corcoran-Ranchetti, and again, our thanks.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Jeff Dietrich. I work with Howard Stein Hudson. We've been hired by the town to help facilitate this comprehensive planning process. I'm going to be very, very quick with this presentation. It's going to give a sort of 10,000-foot overview of what we've found throughout the first couple months of this process, what town staff and the Comprehensive Plan Advisory Committee members have found. Because the real point tonight is to go back to what you all were doing just a few minutes before we started, having conversations with each other, writing down your input, making sure that we hear from you how you experience town in all of these key areas. So I will very, very quickly do a little bit of narrative setting, talking about what is planning, going through the 10,000-foot overview of what we have found in our trend reports, and then we'll go into the open house. Very briefly, comprehensive planning and planning in Lexington has a long history. Dating back to the 1960s was the first comprehensive planning effort. The most recent plan was done in 2002 and 2003. And we are here again 16 years later to create a master plan going forward, a comprehensive plan going forward for Lexington into the 21st century. So, what is planning? It's a big question. The simplest answer that I've ever heard, and the one that I like the most, is it is making a better future for the places that we call home. We do this with a number of different tools, but that is our basic goal, is to make things better for the place that we all love and care about. That requires doing a few things. It means asking the right questions when you're planning. in order to deliver good answers to those questions. It means getting input from everyone in the town, not just people who live in the town, but also people who work there, who move through it, who use its parks, who use its schools. It requires focusing on a number of different issues, not just thinking only about transportation or only about open space or only about zoning codes, but how all of these things interact with each other. And it requires thinking about both who we are as a town, what Lexington is, and what all the towns around it are, and how that influences Lexington's future. So this is one product. This is the traditional sort of product of a comprehensive master plan. It's a zoning map. It's a land use policy. But one of the things that the town really wants to do is go beyond that. Not just create a zoning map, although that is a key component, but also do an overall plan for the town. It means this allows us to do a couple of different things. It allows us to set and modernize those zoning codes, but it gives us a point at which we can check in with people in the community who may have changed, who may have moved to town, who may not have had a chance to participate in the last process. And it allows all of those people together to lay out a proactive vision for the future of the town. And then on the very day-to-day, it guides the work of town bodies as they do the day-to-day work of government. So traditional plan components in Massachusetts would include a number of elements: land use, housing, economic development, natural resources, open space, public facilities, transportation. They don't necessarily have to include all of these things, but that's what the Mass General Laws lays out. I've picked one example of economic development. The way that it's written, you can see on the bottom of the screen, identifies policies and strategies for the expansion or stabilization of the local economic base and the promotion of employment opportunities. It's a little bit technical. It's definitely valuable, but the town wants to make sure that we're not only just following the letter of the Mass General Law, but that we are also setting a proactive vision, as I said earlier. So town staff and the CPAC went through a process of evaluating those traditional categories and building them into other categories. This is a series from the American Planning Association. We sort of went through an exercise of figuring out how all of these things relate, how the category of land use or economic development would relate to a vision statement. So you can see that the APA would say that a resilient economy is related to economic development. That's a different way to frame the issue. So these are the components of the plan as they exist. We want to build a livable community, an accessible and connected community. We want to ensure that there's harmony with nature, a healthy and socially responsible community, a vital and a resilient economy, and that good governance underwrites all of those. So accessible and connected community I highlighted here because it traces back to that economic development. I'm not going to read all of these, but you can see how each one of these draws out how that item relates to all the other categories. So an accessible and connected community is not just about economic development, it's also about transportation, infrastructure networks, and mobility, as an example. So, as I mentioned at the beginning, we have a series of introductory sort of existing conditions studies. This is what we know. So I'm going to very briefly run through the information that you see on the boards that are around the room, and that many of you looked at earlier, to give a sort of top-level, very quick overview of what's in those to set the minds to think, so we can go back into the open house with things on our minds. This is just a set of numbers. They tell an important part of a story, but they are not the whole story. I just want to remind people that, there are other pieces of Lexington, not just numbers. So these trend reports occurred in 6 areas: land use, housing, economic development, transportation, demographics, and cultural and natural resources. I want to reframe these a little bit, and you'll see down on the tables next to each station a different way of thinking about these, a question as well as a topic area. So land use, how do we use our land? How do we make our homes in town? How do we fuel our economic engine? How do we move around town? Who are we? It's a very big, very basic question. And how do we treat our resources? So land use, which I messed up my order of boards here, is right there. For when you go there, is really the town's primary area of direct influence on the built environment, the buildings of the town. How we use our land both reflects and creates our priorities for what goes on it and what goes on in town. So one of the data points that you'll see on these boards down here is an overview of the changes in land use patterns from the 1970s through 1999. I'm going to flip back and forth between these really quickly. Open space, residential space, private open space and recreation, industrial and commercial. These are just the different types of land uses. From the 70s into the 80s, into the 90s, you can see a shift towards a little bit more residential space, increases in commercial space, and slight decreases in open space. Part of this has to do with the way that we categorize and the data level that we have. We now categorize open space a little bit differently. So the town today has about 20% open space, but that is because we used to categorize whole swaths of office parks, for example, as open space because there were trees. It was like, the satellite imagery didn't work. We couldn't figure out, we didn't have the knowledge. Now we have the knowledge. Housing, how do we make our homes in town? This is where people live, where they want to live. It's where they can afford to live. It's how many other people live there. These are the questions to ask. This graph shows the number of teardowns in town versus the number of new units that have been created from 1990 up to 2017. You can see that we, generally speaking, tear down more than we create. And a lot of those are replaced, but this means that we have new buildings, not just the same building being used over and over. We also have an increase in subsidized housing inventory units, affordable units through the state of Massachusetts. Economic development, everybody sort of has their own interpretation of what this means. It includes commercial businesses, it includes industry, it includes shopping, the day-to-day requirements of your life. It includes tourism, and all of the things that everybody in town needs to live. So you can see the housing stock in Lexington was generally built in the 50s and 60s. Many, many more houses were built then than in the future. As we are building new homes, they are getting bigger. That's also true of commercial buildings. The buildings are getting bigger and bigger. So this, obviously, you can extrapolate how bigger buildings mean more availability for residents, means more availability for space, could translate to different levels of property tax income, for example. To compare a little bit, Bedford, Burlington, Lexington, and Waltham. This is the commercial and industrial total assessed property value. You can see that Lexington is on an upward trend from 2009, but it, generally speaking, has significantly less total property value than its surrounding towns. This translates to reliance on residential property tax levies, meaning that the people of town, the housing pays more of a proportion of the total tax levy income of the town than commercial and industrial space. So if we wanted to think about what that means or how to change it, we might have to think about how to allocate the different property taxes that we have throughout town. So transportation, all of the stuff that I just talked about, you actually have to get to for it to be valuable to anybody. This is very basically how people in town get to their lives. Work, school, shopping, your social network. You can't just, if you want to be anywhere other than your house, you have to have a network to get you there. Generally speaking, across the state, across the region, across the country, the ranges of people's lives are expanding, and the modes that they use to get from A to B are shifting and changing. It means ranges are expanding. More people are leaving Lexington to go to work in Boston or in Cambridge than they were in 1990. And then fewer people are coming from out of Lexington to work in Lexington. They also are not moving entirely the same way. So this is 2000, how people got to work. The big red circles are cars for all the surrounding communities. Carpool, public transportation, bicycles, that really tiny little purple switch right in there, walking and working from home. And then in 2015, you can see that across the board, not just in Lexington, that red circle is getting smaller and the other modes are expanding. So we're going to have to think about how to shift the infrastructure of town to support those if you want to encourage that sort of shift. Who are we? This is any number of things, any number of characteristics, how people identify themselves. We focus here on income, race, age, gender, and length of residence as things that spark different types of living throughout town. Lexington is growing at a relatively slow pace. This is a pretty flat line, but it has been growing consistently since 2000 in terms of number of people. It is also aging. This is, you can see on the right, this is going through time and projecting into the future. So this, as we go further and further, this range of 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 is going to keep coming up. That has implications for the services that town needs to provide, for the number of children in schools, for the number of I'm blanking, but you can all realize the implications, I'm sorry. But it's getting racially more diverse. In 1970, it was almost entirely white, and there has been an increase projected in through 2022 of non-white people, especially Asian Americans. And over time, from 2000 and projecting forward, the household income is going up. So this is the 2000, 2017, 2022 lines. You can see that they're all, the wealthiest households are increasing. We're also changing. This is people who have moved to town since 2010. So each area of town has between 15 and 20% of people who did not live there 7 years ago, 8 years ago. This is the evolving community that I was talking about earlier. There's people who weren't in town the last time that we were doing a comprehensive planning process. We now need to bring them into the fold, make sure they feel like a part of the community and they feel like they have a voice like everyone else over the future of that community that they've chosen to call home. Cultural and natural resources. How do we care for our home and our history? How do we treat the things that have been here before us, that come before us? This is the open space and public recreation map for the town. Lexington, this is not news to anybody, has a fair number of historic structures, first period colonial era, harkening back to the legacy of the town. 2,000 designated spaces, buildings across town, and an extraordinary blessing of open space. 2,000 acres in town, which is double the size of the Golden Gate Park. And those are resources that we have to keep in mind. So that's it. I told you it was going to be quick. I think I was about 10 minutes total. I hope that wasn't too fast, but we really do want to get into the open house. So what we're going to do for the next 45 minutes to an hour is I'm going to stop talking at you. I'm going to get down off of the stage, and we're going to do an open house. So we have stations across the room here, and we have a general purpose vision and process station in the back for any questions that don't explicitly fit into one of these 6 categories. We want you to make sure that as you're thinking, you think about all of those questions. You think about your experiences in town. If that lines up with the numbers that I just shared, if there are other questions that you want us to ask going forward, because this is really the beginning of a much larger process that's going to last over the next 2 years of repeated public input, a lot of digging and data mining and planning on the office side. But we want to make sure that we have a strong foundation for that work, and that requires understanding not just the numbers that we've put together, but also everybody's experience. So that's it. I would encourage everybody to visit every station, starting with whatever one you know is most important to you, and then after 45 minutes or an hour, we'll see how everybody's feeling. Sometimes when we do these, people just sort of naturally stop talking, they wind down, they want to go home. So if I see that happening, I might pull everybody back together a little bit sooner. But we want to very briefly have a quick report back from every station of the main topics of conversation. So if you, like me, are a transportation person first, and you're going to spend 45 minutes talking about bike lanes and traffic and buses, then we want to make sure that you get the opportunity to do that, but then also you get to hear what everyone else was talking about and what everyone else cares about. So, thank you for listening. Get up, talk, chat, and if you have any questions, ask anyone with a name tag. That's are all CPAC members and staff. Thank you very much. This is your 10-minute warning. 10 minutes until report backs. Thank you. Hello again, everybody. I want to make sure that we're being really respectful of people's time as we get towards the end of the meeting. So we're going to circle back around for report backs. This is going to be very, very quick, just 5 or 10 minutes. I just want to make sure that everybody gets a chance to hear and say all of this. So please take a seat. There's going to be a long process after this for you to keep continuing all of these conversations. Thank you. Thank you all. I gotta say, you guys are very, very quick at sitting down, and that is a refresher for me, because sometimes this takes like 5 or 10 minutes of reconvening. So we're gonna go very, very quickly through and have somebody who is at every one of these stations give a 3 or 4 sentence, top themes, most interesting things that they heard, summary of input, just in case anybody didn't get a chance to be at one of the stations. We wanna make sure that we think about all of it. I will clarify and disclaim that you are not probably going to hear your idea in these report backs. That does not mean that we haven't noted it, that it won't be considered and carried through the whole process. We just don't want to keep you here all night reading back everything that you just told us. So I think we're going to start with land use over here, because you're both smiling at me.
So we had some conflicting comments, but strengths on land use was bikeability, walking trails, our cultural resources, our open space in our neighborhoods. For weaknesses, we had exclusionary zoning and height restrictions, that they wanted to see more height, and that we need more of a commercial tax base, that residential taxes are too high. For opportunities, allow for more dense or denser housing and incentives to bring more retail to create a reason to stay in Lexington and Lexington Center. Threats, congestion, too much tree removal due to large houses and protect against urbanization is a threat, and the increase in density is a threat. Oh, and I'm Chris, and by the way, I'm on the comprehensive plan committee. Where did I? So what are we? We did strengths, weaknesses. Oh, we did them all. All right. Oh, that was easy enough. Okay, thanks.
Economic development.
Hi, my name is Sarah Felton. I'm the co-chair of the Comprehensive Plan Advisory Committee. I think I'm just going to give a sort of general overview. We heard a lot about the plan developments that are happening in town and really doing a comprehensive look at all the impacts in terms of traffic and I'm sorry, now you can hear me. Apologies. So we heard a lot about the big plan developments and the impacts they might have, specifically Hartwell Ave on traffic, and what are some of the mitigating factors. So planning holistically around those developments. We also heard that the town is a lot of concern, I think, as a weakness, that the town is resistant to change and resistant often to increased density without always understanding the benefits. And some discussion about how that might be, how communication might help with overcoming that resistance. I think we heard a lot about the town center, the lack of diversity in retail, the decreasing diversity in retail there, concerns about vacancy rates, and about what are the opportunities in the town center. Also coming up were some of the nodes around town, the retail nodes, and what are the opportunities there to make them stronger. That's a really broad view. There was a lot of other stuff here, so I'm sorry if I didn't mention the specific issue.
Yeah, honestly, like I said, we'd be here all night if we mentioned everything. So broad themes is good. Matt, in housing.
Hi, it's Matt Daggett. I'm on the Comprehensive Plan Advisory Committee. We got a wide spectrum, pretty much on every facet you can think of, from kind of, both ends of, I guess, some of the extremes you would see. On the threats, A lot of folks talking about tremendous pressure on the smaller inventory of smaller homes in town, too many teardowns, less affordable housing, and concern over the amount of land that's being subdivided. Some of the opportunities, we're looking at design features for accessibility, looking at building more affordable housing, opportunities to change both the economic and diversity in town, as well as potentially increasing taxes for rental units, moving some of the tax burden. Threats, some of the interesting ones from lack of regulation around groundwater for new development. Taxes are too high, concerns of a loss of open space. And some of the strengths were that people feel a strong sense of community, strong-knit neighborhoods. They like the historic districts and the character. Good schools, property values, a lot of green and open space, the sustainability energy initiatives with respect to housing, and the community center.
Awkwardly walk across the whole room. How you guys feeling? Demographics.
Hi. We had a lot of comments about diversity, a recognition that the town is ethnically diverse and intellectually diverse and religiously diverse, but we are not economically diverse. I think if I were to count all of the comments on these 2 pages, it probably says we are not economically diverse about 25 times. And I think that that's something that we will need to take into consideration. It's economically unavoidable for mid and lower income families to move in. There's too many teardowns, there's too many subdivisions. And these are all tied to the demographics of the people that are moving in and the ones that are moving out.
Oh, yeah.
I'm Marilyn Fenalosa.
I am Jennifer Gingras. I work for the town in the community development. And some of the strengths, Lexington's recreational facilities. Lexington, the town preserves and supports Lexington Community Farm. Lexington has the bikeway across Lexington routes, and we're adding many more. Another strength is all of the conservation land and the diversity of it. And then another strength, and perhaps somewhat of a weakness, was Lexington's, we need to recognize the citizens' understanding of responsibility to teach the world about the history of the town and democracy. I guess it had previously been a part of the vision for Lexington, and we may be going away from that a little bit. Some of the weaknesses is that we need to balance the historic aspect with resident needs, such as having bike shelters, potentially. We need to make conservation areas more accessible, and then that there was too much open space overall. That was a big one. Opportunities, there's a need for safer biking and walking. We can support and promote the Lexington Community Farm more. And another opportunity was to make maybe a committee for environmentally friendly town, to promote composting, less garbage, and renewable energy. And then threats, a lot of people had an issue with the comparison of the open space that Lexington has compared to the Golden State Park, because the Lexington area is spread out, and economic pressures. And then the last threat was pollution with air and noise.
I'll take full credit and blame for the open space comparison. That was really just to give a sense of scale and size to those who it's helpful, but my apologies. Last but not least, transportation.
Hi, I'm Stacy Butel. I'm on the the Comprehensive Planning Advisory Committee. So I separated this up into modes of transit as opposed to strengths and weaknesses. I'm going to start with transit. And we heard for what would Lexington being considered a suburb that we had pretty good transit service. The Lexpress was talked about, the Rev bus was talked about, and as well as the MBTA bus lines. However, there was always a desire for more public transit options, particularly extended service on weekends. And then also for those people that ride the bus, there are very few covered bus stops for people to ride transit and to encourage people to continue to do that. In terms of cars, we heard pretty much from just about every neighborhood within Lexington about cut-through traffic and the issues that we're all faced with these days with cut-through traffic as well as incredibly fast-moving traffic. We don't have a solution to that at this stage, obviously, but it's something that many, many people are worried about in town and trying to think of ways that we can address that. There was also some discussion about the use of car sharing services like Uber and Lyft, and if that might be an opportunity to better serve our older population as well as our millennials and younger population in terms of helping to supplement kind of the transit and to try to at least get some fewer cars on the road, which actually doesn't really do that. But and then there was some discussion about parking issues. There were those that said there isn't enough parking. There were those that were saying that the parking isn't enforced. So again, there's the issue of how do we handle our cars once we're in them and where do we put them. And then also for bicycles, the Minuteman Bike Path was a huge positive that many people talked about, but outside of that, many people don't feel comfortable biking around Lexington because of the fast-moving traffic and the lack of protected bike lanes and even marked bike lanes and sort of the reliance on sharrows. So there was discussion about that from bicycles. In addition, the fact that many of our schools don't have bike safety, so that we're not necessarily promoting children riding their bikes to school and other places. And then finally, to get to walking, and then to pick up again on the safe routes to school issue, there was a lot of discussion about why don't parents just either put their children on the bus or encourage them to walk or bike to school. Could we promote that better? Is there a fee structure that would promote that in terms of reversing the cost for the person that's dropping off their child at school as opposed to the person who's sending their child on the bus? So some discussion about that. There was also some discussion specifically about downtown and crosswalk markings. And for those people that live in Lexington, they understand and know about all the different mid-block crossings that happen on Mass Ave. But for those who are using it as cut-throughs and are speeding through, it's very dangerous for people walking. And so we have relatively well-marked crosswalks with the in-street pedestrian signs and everything. But are there other things that we could do to make those crossings safer? Are there other engineering solutions? So that was essentially kind of.
So part of the reason that I wanted to make sure we ended with those report backs tonight is trying to get you guys excited and thinking about things at the end of the meeting. So we don't want to just have this conversation end. So to end on next steps, because we're entering a new phase of this process, staff in the CPAC are now launching phase 2. So this was the conclusion of phase 1, which is the first existing conditions, figuring things out, gathering input. But the main chunk of work coming up over the next year and a half, 2 years is going to be the actual planning, the creation of the guide. And like we said a number of times tonight, that's going to involve a number of opportunities for people to comment in a number of different ways, not only at public meetings, but probably also online, going out in the field. We want to make sure that we're going to people so that anybody who can't come tonight can get their input included, regardless of age or location or anything. So I want you all to continue this conversation. Tell your friends and neighbors that this is going on, that this plan is happening, that you want them to participate, that you want them to give their information to, like you did tonight when you signed up. An email address will just get you all of the updates that are coming out. We will be back. We'll keep talking to you. Thank you all again for coming tonight. And I just want to hand it back to Jenna at the end of this to officially adjourn the meeting.
Thank you. Do I hear a motion to adjourn? Second? All in favor? Aye. Thank you very much. This planning board is now officially adjourned, but we do want to thank our comprehensive plan advisory committee members, our planning board staff, and of course Howard Stein Hudson representatives for all their hard work. And please, if you didn't get a chance to write something, or something occurs to you in conversation or in the shower or whatever, please email it in. This is going to be a long process. We want to hear more from you. Thank you and have a good evening. Oh.